Let's take a look at a sample visual arts rubric. It might be the kind that you have seen or used yourself in a visual arts classroom to measure student performance. We're going to look at a few things this rubric does well, a few things this rubric does that is maybe in disservice to students and learning, and then we're going to go through a brief overview of what are the qualities that make rubrics effective for students and teaching and learning. So let's start with the good stuff. One positive that I see on this rubric is that there's a place for students to score themselves. It's absolutely critical for student engagement, for motivation, and for tracking of their own learning for students to have an opportunity for self-assessment and reflection. Just by simply putting a place for students to score themselves on a rubric can really start that conversation. Another positive this rubric has going for it is that they're using a 4-point scale rather than a 100-point scale. A 4-point scale is effective because it gives equal weight to all levels of performance. Oftentimes we use a 100-point scale, and the 100-point scale is weighted heavily toward failure. Sometimes even 60% of that scale is at the failing end. This rubric makes a good effort at adding some explanation of the expectations. We always want clear expectations for both the teacher and the student so we know exactly what's expected. Transparency in that area can increase student performance exponentially. And now let's take a look at a few things that this rubric does that might not help give students and teachers the information they need to improve. One is that this student includes several compliance measures or things that are really about grading performance on behavior or following directions. So for instance, this top one here is this rubric filled out in blue ink and turned in with finished artwork. That tells us nothing about what a student can know and be able to do in visual art. It just tells us if they can follow directions. Is it important to follow directions? Absolutely. But when we include compliance measures in with academic content measures, the messages can get muddled. And we'll take a look at that more deeply in a moment. This rubric also includes a quantitative measure. It says this work should include at least 6 geometric shapes. It makes me wonder, is 6 geometric shapes excellent or is that good? Is that average and anything better is excellent? When we put in qualitative measures, things like how students use the shape or qualities of the shape itself, we can give students a lot more information about what they can know and be able to do in art rather than if they can fulfill a checklist item. Again, it makes the art content piece more about following directions. And although I spoke about this rubric including some descriptions, if you take a look at these descriptions, there's a whole lot of stuff in them, right? So looking at the craftsmanship, neat, clean, complete, art tools used safely and appropriately. If a student scores a 3, have they done all of these things? Have they done part of these things? What exactly has a student done to earn a 3 or a 4? Is it that they don't use tools safely, but they're neat and clean? How can we separate those out to make it clear? And this also asks us to total all these points up in the very end for one lump grade that includes behavior and includes scores on visual arts content area standards. When we lump those all together, it makes the message very cloudy. Does a student know their art stuff but can't follow a direction? Or does a student follow directions really well but doesn't know enough art stuff to be successful at the next level? Let's take a look about how some of these scenarios might play out with some scores to illustrate my points. Here is a student who did well in almost everything, better than well, excellent, even though we don't quite know what excellent means. But in one area, they got a 1, a needs improvement in effort. What that doesn't tell us is which part of the effort, like we talked about before. Is it that they didn't use class time wisely? Is it that they turned it in late? What if they turned it in late because they were working really hard on those geometric shapes? What then? And that all gets distilled down into a score, totaled up. If you just paid attention to the score, which will go in the gradebook, this student got a 90%, which tells the student and perhaps even the parent that this child is exceeding, is doing very, very well. It says nothing about the effort when we lump it all together and make it into one grade. Let's look at another scenario. In this scenario, the student did well in all of the compliance measures, all the ones about behavior and following directions. They filled out the rubric in blue ink and turned it in with a finished artwork, although I don't know how you can do that in an excellent way as opposed to a good way. They put in a lot of effort, they used good craftsmanship apparently, or I should say excellent craftsmanship, and they participated in class, but they didn't do very well in any of the actual visual arts measures, the ones about using geometric shape or colors or creativity. Even though this student did well in all of the direction following, but didn't do very well in the arts, they got a 67%, right? The confusing thing here also is you'll notice that there are 4 measures that are about following directions on this visual arts rubric, and only 3 of them are actually about art standards. To me, that seems like it's imbalanced. Let's look at another one. What if a student did well in all of the art measures but couldn't find it in themselves to follow directions or behave appropriately? That student still scores a 57%. Although that's not passing, but they've done well on all of those art scores. They know their geometric shapes, apparently. They can use warm or cool colors. They're creative. And yet they don't even pass the assignment because they couldn't behave or use blue ink. What if a student gets all 3s, which is apparently good according to this rubric? Does good really equal 75%? Do most students equate a C with good? Do you as a teacher equate that C with a good? Or what about the student who is average? Is average really failing? These questions make us think about the way we construct rubrics and use them with our students. Effective scales and rubrics should include the following things: a separation between academic content and behavior or compliance measures. Do we need to report out student behavior? Absolutely. Do we need to report out how students are doing against art standards? Absolutely yes as well. But when we separate those two, we can distinguish where students need support in behavior or direction following, or where students need support in the visual arts. We also should use clear descriptions of each performance level. If we're going to put excellent or good or average, we've got to know what good or excellent or average means, and so do students. Clear descriptions on what we're looking for is vital. Qualitative indicators rather than quantitative indicators make assessment more about student learning and thinking and less about checklists and following directions. Effective scales and rubrics should also include an opportunity for students to track their own learning over time. Students who can self-assess and set goals will be exponentially better in reaching those goals because they are motivated intrinsically. A place for written feedback is really important. Notice there wasn't any area where a teacher could write or a student could write about specific scores in specific areas. And effective scales and rubrics should be general enough to use on many assignments. That's how we can measure student performance over time. We can see growth in something like using elements and principles, or growth in something like color theory, if we use it over several lessons and measure and track student progress and learning over time.